Today we're reading Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 through 30, Mark chapter 14, verses 1 through 26, Luke chapter 21, beginning with verse 37 down to chapter 22, verse 30, and then John chapter 12, beginning with verse 44 down to chapter 13:35. Now, the events recorded in these four Gospels all coincide as having to do with the same occasion. We're just a couple of days before the crucifixion when we start, and then on the eve of the crucifixion by the time we end today's reading. We find, first of all, in Luke and John, Jesus preaching in the temple. And there the Pharisees and the Sadducees, well, the Sanhedrin as a whole, they begin to conspire against Jesus because they've just had all they can take. Now, actually, it was in God's mind, and Jesus understood that this would be his last Passover, and in fact, he would be the Passover lamb, paying the sin debt for the sins of the whole world right here on this Passover day. But the Sanhedrin, they conspire against Jesus, and we're then told about a story that we also read in John chapter 12 a little bit earlier. But Matthew and Mark record the supper at the leper's house, Simon the leper's house, as it turns out. But then we find that Judas makes a deal with the Sanhedrin. Now, the object was to try to catch Jesus at night when he wasn't surrounded by a multitude of followers. They could catch him during the daytime, but then it would be obvious that these Jewish leaders were complicit in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They didn't want that. They wanted to see if somehow this whole thing could be blamed on the Romans. So they make this deal with Judas in Matthew 26, Mark 14, and Luke 22. Then the disciples planned the Passover meal for Jesus and themselves for the Nisan 14 Passover supper. And then we have Jesus' last Passover meal. They actually washed some feet that evening, but the feet washing ceremony is only recorded by John. An interesting response from Peter there as Jesus moves over to wash his feet. And then in that same time frame, Judas is identified as the betrayer after they wash the feet, but before they actually partake of the communion or the Lord's Supper, which was instituted there in this passage as well. In Matthew 26, 26 to 30, Mark 14, 22 to 26, and Luke chapter 22, verses 17 through 20. Then you get into this discussion that only Luke records about who's the greatest among the disciples. Probably had something to do with that foot washing ceremony that evening. Read the notes, I think you'll get a great deal of insight. Well, some heavy stuff in today's reading, and I think you'll get something out of it that you'll treasure, and we'll see you tomorrow.